What happens when a multi-billionaire, a woman who commands boardrooms and moves markets with a single phone call, breaks down in the middle of a humble diner? It's not over a failed merger or a stock market crash. It's over a simple tarnished silver necklace worn by a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. This isn't just a story about wealth and poverty. It's a story about a granddaughter who was thrown away, a daughter who died carrying devastating secrets, and a family torn apart by pride and prejudice 30 years ago. Tonight, Grace Foreman will discover that the mixed-race waitress serving her coffee is wearing her own mother's necklace, the same locket she placed around her newborn granddaughter's neck before abandoning them both to protect her corporate image. But when federal agents storm the diner claiming Grace stole millions from desperate factory workers, she'll learn that her past sins have caught up with her in the most impossible way. The waitress she abandoned is about to become the only person who can save her from spending the rest of her life in prison. This is the incredible true story of how a tarnished silver necklace became the key to either destroying a billionaire's empire forever or giving her the one thing money can't buy, a second chance at family. Stay with me through this story by subscribing to this channel, like and share this story to your community. The rain fell like accusations against the windshield of Grace Foreman's black Bentley, each drop carrying the weight of 30 years' worth of buried secrets. At 71, Grace had weathered countless storms, hostile takeovers, market crashes, personal betrayals that would have destroyed lesser mortals. But tonight, as lightning split the sky above Interstate 95, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: genuine fear. Not fear of financial ruin or corporate scandal. Fear of herself. Fear of the memories clawing their way to the surface, demanding acknowledgement after 3 decades of careful suppression. "Ma'am, perhaps we should find shelter until this passes," her driver, Marcus, suggested from the front seat. His voice carried the careful deference of someone who'd learned to read Grace Foreman's moods like weather patterns. Tonight, the barometric pressure was dangerously low. Grace stared through the rain-streaked glass at the neon sign flickering in the distance. Mel's Diner, hot food, cold beer, warm welcome. The pink and blue letters buzzed erratically, casting an otherworldly glow across the puddle-strewn parking lot. It was the antithesis of everything Grace represented. Common, unpretentious, real. "Pull over," she heard herself say. Marcus's eyebrows lifted in the rear-view mirror. In 15 years of service, he'd never known Grace Foreman to voluntarily enter an establishment that didn't have a Michelin rating or a membership fee. "Ma'am, the diner. Pull over." As the Bentley glided into the parking lot, Grace's reflection stared back at her from the passenger window. Silver hair pulled into its customary chignon, Chanel suit pressed to perfection despite the late hour, diamond earrings catching the dashboard light like frozen tears. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single phone call. A woman who had built an empire on the foundation of calculated choices and emotional detachment. What she didn't look like was a grandmother. She'd made sure of that. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed through the rain, casting everything in harsh relief. Grace could see figures moving behind the steamed windows, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unburdened by the weight of decisions that echoed through generations. She envied them their simplicity, even as she despised herself for the weakness of that envy. "Shall I wait in the car, ma'am?" Marcus asked as he held the door open, his umbrella creating a small sanctuary against the storm. Grace stepped into the rain anyway, letting the drops strike her face like a baptism she'd never had the courage to seek. "Give me 30 minutes. The bell above Mel's door chimed with the kind of cheerful insistence that belonged to a simpler time, when diners were gathering places and food came with stories instead of stock options. Grace stepped inside, her designer heels clicking against worn linoleum that had seen decades of dreams deferred and promises broken. The interior was exactly what she'd expected. Red vinyl booths cracked with age, a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, the lingering aroma of bacon grease and coffee that had been brewing too long. It was the kind of place where people came to hide from the world, or from themselves. Grace chose a corner booth, sliding across vinyl that protested with every movement. She kept her sunglasses on despite the dim lighting, a barrier between herself and the curious glances of late-night diners who recognized wealth when they saw it, even in a place like this. A menu appeared in front of her, plastic laminated and sticky with years of handling. Grace stared at it without seeing, her mind drifting to another time, another choice, another moment when she'd let pride override love and called it good business. The coffee arrived without her ordering it, black and bitter as regret. Grace wrapped her hands around the ceramic mug, seeking warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the ice that had been growing in her chest for 30 years. She was Grace Foreman. She owned 3 Fortune 500 companies, employed over 50,000 people, and had her name on hospital wings and university buildings across the globe. She was a philanthropist, a visionary, a woman who had shattered glass ceilings with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her life. But sitting in that diner, surrounded by the detritus of other people's dreams, she felt like nothing more than a fraud. A woman who had gained the whole world and lost her soul in the process. The waitress approached with practiced efficiency, order pad ready, and Grace looked up into a face that stopped her heart mid-beat. Caramel skin glowing under the harsh fluorescence, natural curls escaping from a practical ponytail, dark eyes that held depths of experience beyond her years. Beautiful in the way that spoke of mixed heritage, black and white features blending into something uniquely striking. And there, resting against her throat like a whispered prayer, was a tarnished silver necklace. A delicate chain holding a small locket engraved with the initials, GF. Grace's hands began to tremble around her coffee cup. The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm, too real. Because she recognized that necklace. She'd given it to her daughter Elena on her 16th birthday, her own mother's necklace, passed down through generations of Foreman women. The necklace Elena had left behind the night she walked out of Grace's life forever, carrying with her the granddaughter Grace had been too proud to claim. What are the chances that a family secret buried for 3 decades could surface in a roadside diner? Tell us in the comments what you think Grace should do when faced with this impossible moment. The waitress smiled, her voice carrying a slight southern lilt. "What can I get you tonight?" Grace opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Only a sound that might have been her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "Just coffee," Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on her tongue. Grace Foreman never whispered, never hesitated, never showed weakness. Yet here she was, undone by a 20-something waitress wearing a ghost from her past around her neck. The young woman, Ashley, her name tag read in cheerful red letters, nodded and moved to refill Grace's cup. Up close, Grace could see the exhaustion that lived beneath Ashley's professional smile, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from working double shifts and counting every penny. Her uniform was clean but showed signs of careful mending, and her shoes were the practical kind worn by people who spent long hours on their feet. But it was her eyes that nearly broke Grace's resolve. Elena's eyes. The same warm brown with flecks of gold that had once looked up at Grace with unconditional love, before pride and prejudice had built walls between them that proved insurmountable. "You okay, honey?" Ashley asked, genuine concern creeping into her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If you only knew, Grace thought, but instead she forced herself to nod. "Long day." Ashley's smile softened with understanding. "Tell me about it. I've been pulling doubles all week." She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then back to Grace. "You don't look like our usual crowd, if you don't mind me saying. Car trouble?" "Something like that," Grace replied, studying Ashley's face for traces of the family resemblance that was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The stubborn set of her jaw, that was pure Elena. The way she tilted her head when listening, that came from Grace's own mother, a gesture Grace hadn't thought about in years. "Well, you're safe here. Mel's has been taking in strays since 1962. Ashley's laugh was musical, unguarded. "That's what my mama used to say, anyway. Said this place saved her more times than she could count." Grace's pulse quickened. "Your mother? She came here often?" "Every few months, when she was feeling nostalgic." We used to drive down from Charlotte when I was little. Ashley's expression grew distant, fond. She'd order the same thing every time, apple pie and black coffee, and tell me stories about the old days. Never said much about her family, though. Claimed they were better left in the past. The irony cut through Grace like a blade. Elena had been here, in this very diner, perhaps sitting in this same booth, carrying the weight of their estrangement while Grace had been building her empire on the foundation of that same pain. All those years, they'd been living parallel lives of loss and regret, neither knowing how to bridge the gap that pride had created. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman," Grace said carefully, her hands still trembling around her coffee cup. "The best." Ashley's voice caught slightly, and she cleared her throat. "Lost her 5 years ago to cancer. Fought it like the warrior she was, right up until the end. 5 years. Grace felt the number settle in her chest like a stone. Elena had been gone for 5 years, and Grace had never known. Had never had the chance to say goodbye, to apologize, to tell her daughter that not a day had passed without regret for the choice she'd made 30 years ago. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Grace whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Ashley's fingers moved instinctively to the necklace at her throat. "Thank you." This was hers, about the only thing of value she had to leave me. Used to say it was her most precious possession, that it connected her to the women in her family who came before. She paused, studying Grace's face. "You sure you're all right? You really do look like you've seen a ghost." Grace forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember that she was Grace Foreman, a woman who had built an empire on calculated decisions and emotional control. But looking at Ashley, at Elena's daughter, at her granddaughter, all of that seemed meaningless. "The necklace," Grace heard herself say. "It's beautiful. Has it been in your family long?" Ashley's hand tightened protectively around the locket. "My whole life. Mama said it belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. The initials are worn down, but you can still make them out. GF. She smiled sadly. "I never knew my grandmother. Mama said they had a falling out before I was born, something that couldn't be fixed." But it could be, Grace wanted to scream. "It could be fixed right now, right here, if I just had the courage to tell you the truth." Instead, she watched Ashley move between tables, serving coffee and collecting plates, completely unaware that her grandmother was sitting 20 feet away, drowning in 30 years of regret. Ashley worked with quiet efficiency, treating each customer with the same genuine warmth, never letting her own struggles show through her professional facade. Grace recognized that strength. It was the same resilience that had carried her through her own difficult childhood, the same determination that had built her empire from nothing. But while Grace had hardened that strength into armor, Ashley had kept hers soft around the edges, tempered with compassion. A trucker at the counter was giving Ashley a hard time about his order, his voice raised and belligerent. Grace watched as her granddaughter handled the situation with grace and diplomacy, never losing her temper, never letting his anger become hers. It was a masterclass in emotional intelligence, and Grace found herself filled with fierce pride. "This is Elena's daughter," she thought. "This is what came from the love I was too proud to accept." Ashley returned to Grace's booth, coffee pot in hand. "More coffee. You've barely touched what you have. Tell me about yourself," Grace found herself saying. The words came out more like a command than a request, and she softened her tone. "If you don't mind. You seem like someone with stories to tell." Ashley glanced around the diner, then slid into the opposite side of the booth. "It's slow tonight, and frankly, you're the most interesting customer we've had all week." She smiled. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Grace thought. "I want to know everything about the granddaughter I threw away, about the life I never got to share, about the woman you've become despite my failures." "Are you from around here?" she asked instead. "Born and raised about an hour north, in Charlotte. Moved down here after Mama passed." Ashley's expression grew distant. "Needed a fresh start, you know? Sometimes running away is the only way to move forward." Grace understood that sentiment more than Ashley could possibly know. She'd been running from the consequences of her choices for 30 years, building walls of success and philanthropy to hide the guilt that ate at her daily. What about family? Besides your mother, I mean. Ashley's smile turned wistful. Just me. Mama never talked about her people, and my father. She shrugged. Let's just say he wasn't the staying type. But Mama always said family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them most. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She thought about all the times she could have shown up, should have shown up, if she'd just swallowed her pride and reached out. All the birthdays, graduations, milestones she'd missed because she was too stubborn to admit she'd made a mistake. Your mother sounds wise, Grace managed. She was. Stubborn as hell, too. Ashley laughed. Said I got that from both sides of the family, though she never would tell me what she meant by that. Grace knew exactly what Elena had meant. The Foreman women had always been headstrong, determined to a fault. It had been their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, the trait that had built empires and destroyed relationships in equal measure. Do you ever wonder about the rest of your family? Grace asked carefully. Your grandmother, other relatives? Ashley was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Every day, she admitted. Especially after Mama died. There were so many questions I never got to ask, so many blanks in my history. She looked up at Grace. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and feel like you've been there before, even though you know you haven't? That's how I feel about family sometimes. Like there are people out there who share my blood, my history, but I'll never know them. Grace's throat closed around the words she wanted to say. You do know me. I'm sitting right across from you, and I've been searching for you my whole life, even when I was too proud to admit it. The bell above the door chimed, and a group of late-night travelers entered, shaking rain from their coats. Ashley glanced over, then back to Grace. Duty calls, she said, sliding out of the booth. But thank you for listening. It's not often I get to talk about Mama with someone who seems to genuinely care. As Ashley moved away to tend to her other customers, Grace sat in the vinyl booth and felt the full weight of 30 years of loss settling over her like a shroud. She was looking at everything she'd given up, everything she'd been too proud and too afraid to claim. Elena's daughter was alive, beautiful, strong, and completely alone in the world, not knowing that her grandmother was one of the most powerful women in America, not knowing that she had family who would move mountains to protect her, not knowing that love had been waiting for her all along, hidden behind walls of regret and stubborn pride. Grace pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over Marcus's number. She could leave now, slip back into her Bentley and her carefully controlled world, pretend this encounter had never happened. Ashley would never know who had been sitting in booth 7, drinking coffee and watching her work with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to depend only on herself. But as Grace watched her granddaughter laugh with a customer, saw the way she treated everyone with the same genuine warmth regardless of their station in life, she realized something that shook her to her core. Ashley didn't need rescuing. She needed family. The decision might have remained theoretical, suspended in the amber of Grace's guilt and indecision, if not for what happened next. Ashley was clearing a table near the window when the diner's front door burst open with violent force. 3 men stumbled in from the storm, but these weren't ordinary travelers seeking shelter. Grace's survival instincts, honed by decades of navigating corporate warfare and reading dangerous situations, immediately went on high alert. The leader was tall and lean, with a kind of predatory stillness that spoke of barely controlled violence. His companions flanked him with practiced ease, and Grace noticed the telltale bulge under the first man's jacket that suggested he was armed. Their eyes swept the diner with calculating precision, taking inventory of exits, customers, potential threats. Evening, the leader said, his voice carrying a false cheerfulness that made Grace's skin crawl. Terrible night to be on the road. Ashley straightened, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension that had suddenly filled the air. Welcome to Mel's. You can sit anywhere you'd like. Grace watched her granddaughter with growing alarm. Ashley was handling the situation with admirable composure, but Grace could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she positioned herself near the kitchen door. Survival instincts were apparently another family trait. "Actually," the leader said, moving deeper into the diner, "we're not here for the food." His gaze fixed on Ashley with an intensity that made Grace's blood run cold. "We're here for you, sweetheart." The few other customers began to shift uncomfortably, some reaching for phones, others edging toward the exits. But Grace remained frozen in her booth, watching a nightmare unfold in real time. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," Ashley said, her voice steady despite the fear Grace could see creeping into her eyes. "Ashley Chen." The man smiled, but it was the kind of expression sharks wore before they fed. "Daughter of Elena Chen, formerly Elena Foreman?" Grace's world tilted on its axis. They knew. Somehow, these men knew about the connection between Ashley and the Foreman family. But how? And more importantly, what did they want? "I don't know what you're talking about," Ashley said, but her hand moved instinctively to the necklace at her throat, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the leader. "See, that's where things get interesting," he continued, pulling out a tablet and swiping to reveal what looked like financial documents. "Because according to our research, your grandmother is Grace Foreman. You know, the billionaire. And that makes you very valuable to certain people who have grievances with the Foreman family." Grace felt the coffee turn to acid in her stomach. Her worst nightmare was unfolding before her eyes. The past she tried so hard to bury was rising from the grave, and it was targeting the granddaughter she'd never protected, never claimed, never acknowledged. "My grandmother is dead," Ashley said firmly. "My mother told me so." "Did she now?" The man chuckled. "Well, mothers tell their children lots of things. Doesn't make them true. Grace Foreman is very much alive, very much worth several $billion, and very much about to pay handsomely for her granddaughter's safe return." The word granddaughter hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Grace watched Ashley's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications sank in. "You're insane," Ashley whispered. "I work in a diner. I drive a 15-year-old Honda. I live in a studio apartment above the dry cleaners. Do I look like someone related to a billionaire?" "Funny thing about family," the leader said, signaling to his companions. "Sometimes it finds you whether you want it or not." Grace knew she had seconds to act. Her mind raced through possibilities, calculating risks and outcomes with the same precision she'd once used to orchestrate hostile takeovers. She could call Marcus, but he was outside and would take too long to reach them. She could call the police, but these men would be gone, with Ashley, long before help arrived. Or she could do what she should have done 30 years ago, stand up and fight for her family. Grace rose from the booth with the kind of commanding presence that had once made CEOs tremble. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I believe you're looking for me." Every head in the diner turned toward her. Ashley's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. The leader's expression shifted from predatory confidence to something resembling surprise. "Well, well," he said slowly. "Grace Foreman. In the flesh." "In the flesh," Grace confirmed, moving with deliberate calm toward the center of the diner. "Which means you no longer need the girl. Your business is with me." "Actually," the leader said, his smile returning, "our business is with both of you. See, there are some people who feel the Foreman family owes them a substantial debt. Something about a factory closure in Myanmar 15 years ago, displaced workers, promises broken. They've been very patient, waiting for the right moment to collect." Grace's memory flashed to a textile factory her company had been forced to shutter during the 2008 financial crisis. She'd tried to provide severance, retraining programs, but in the chaos of the global economic meltdown, some things had fallen through the cracks. Apparently, some people had very long memories. "I'll come with you willingly," Grace said. "But the girl stays here." She's innocent in all this. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, the leader said. She's leverage, insurance, and according to our sources, she's the key to making sure you cooperate fully. Ashley found her voice. Wait, just wait a minute. She looked between Grace and the men, her mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. Are you actually saying that you're my grandmother? Grace met her granddaughter's eyes across the diner, 30 years of regret and love and desperate hope pouring out in a single moment of truth. Yes, she said simply. I am. The revelation hit Ashley like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the nearest table, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. But Mama said, she told me you were dead. I was, Grace said quietly. To your mother, to you, I've been dead for 30 years. And I deserved to be. How touching, the leader interrupted. A family reunion. But we really do need to be going. Both of you. Now. Grace's mind raced. She could see the exits, could calculate their chances of escape. But with Ashley in shock and the men positioned strategically throughout the diner, their options were limited. Unless. Before we go anywhere, Grace said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had once commanded boardrooms, I think you should know that my driver is currently contacting my security team. They'll be here within minutes. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. Grace had learned long ago that confidence could be its own weapon. The leader's smile faltered slightly. Nice try, but we've been watching you for weeks. We know your patterns, your security protocols. Your driver is sitting in a car in the parking lot, probably listening to the radio. Grace's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. These weren't random criminals. They were professionals who had done their homework. Which meant Ashley was in more danger than Grace had initially realized. What do you want? Grace asked directly. Money. I can transfer whatever amount you're looking for. Right now. Electronic transfer, untraceable if that's how you prefer it. Oh, we'll definitely be discussing financial compensation, the leader said. But first, we need to take a little trip. There are people who want to meet you both. People who have been waiting a very long time for this opportunity. Ashley stepped forward, her initial shock giving way to the same stubborn courage Grace recognized from the Foreman bloodline. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not going anywhere with you. And neither is she. The leader's expression hardened. I'm afraid that's not your choice to make, sweetheart. In that moment, Grace saw her granddaughter's true character emerge. Despite being thrust into an impossible situation, despite learning that her entire understanding of her family history had been a lie, Ashley stood her ground. She was scared. Grace could see that, but she wasn't backing down. This is Elena's daughter, Grace thought with fierce pride. This is what I gave up. Actually, Grace said, making the most important decision of her life. It is her choice. And mine. She looked directly at Ashley. I know this is overwhelming, and I know you have every reason not to trust me. But right now, we need to work together. Ashley stared at her for a long moment, searching Grace's face for something. Truth, perhaps, or genuine remorse. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Ashley asked. For the first time in 30 years, Grace Foreman felt like she might actually deserve the title of grandmother. Behind the counter, Grace said quietly, her eyes never leaving the leader's face. There's usually a panic button or silent alarm in establishments like this. Ashley nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding passing between them like electricity. Grace could see Elena in that moment of quick comprehension, the same intelligence that had once made her daughter such a formidable debate partner, even as a teenager. I don't think so, the leader said, having caught their exchange. He gestured to one of his companions, who moved to block Ashley's path to the counter. Everyone stays exactly where they are. The diner's other customers were now openly terrified. An elderly couple huddled in a corner booth, the man's hand protectively covering his wife's. A trucker at the counter had his phone out, but one sharp look from the second gunman made him place it slowly on the Formica surface. Grace's mind catalogued every detail, every potential weapon, every possible escape route. The kitchen door was 30 feet away. The front entrance was blocked. The restrooms might have a back exit, but getting there would require passing 2 armed men. "You're making a mistake," Grace said, keeping her voice level and authoritative. "Kidnapping me will bring more attention than you can handle. The FBI, Interpol, every law enforcement agency in the country will be looking for us." "Will they?" The leader pulled out his phone and showed Grace a news headline. "Grace Foreman takes indefinite leave of absence for health reasons." The timestamp was from 3 hours ago. Amazing what a good hacker can do with corporate communication systems. Grace's blood ran cold. These weren't amateur criminals looking for a quick ransom. This was a sophisticated operation, planned and executed with military precision. They'd been watching her, studying her patterns, preparing for this moment. "The factory in Myanmar," Grace said, pieces clicking into place. "You're working for the families who lost their livelihoods." "Among others," the leader confirmed. "Turns out when you're a billionaire who plays fast and loose with people's lives, you make enemies. Lots of them." Ashley stepped forward, her initial fear transformed into something fiercer. Whatever Grace did, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know she existed until 5 minutes ago." "But your leverage," the leader explained patiently. "And leverage is power. Amazing how quickly people's priorities shift when family is involved." Grace watched her granddaughter process this information, saw the moment when Ashley understood that her connection to the Foreman name had just painted a target on her back. The guilt that crashed over Grace was overwhelming. 30 years of trying to protect Ashley by staying away, only to have her presence here put the girl in mortal danger. "How did you find her?" Grace asked, genuinely curious despite their circumstances. "DNA databases are wonderful things," the leader said. "Your daughter Elena was quite thorough in her attempts to disappear, but she made one mistake. When Ashley was born, the hospital ran standard genetic screening. That information eventually made its way into medical databases. And with enough money and patience." He shrugged. "Everyone leaves a trail." Ashley's face had gone pale. "You've been tracking me? For how long?" 6 months. Maybe 7. We needed to be sure, needed to understand your routines, your vulnerabilities." The leader's smile was predatory. "That little Honda you drive? The studio apartment? The fact that you work alone most nights? We know everything about you, sweetheart." Grace felt rage building in her chest, the kind of white-hot fury she hadn't experienced since her daughter had walked out all those years ago. But this time, the anger wasn't born of pride or stubbornness. It was protective, maternal, fierce. "If you hurt her," Grace said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "I will destroy you. Not just financially. I will erase every trace of your existence from this earth." "Touching," the leader said. "But you're hardly in a position to make threats." That's when Ashley surprised them all. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something that made Grace's heart skip with recognition, "I think you're the ones who aren't in a position to make threats." The leader turned to her with amusement. "Really? And why is that?" Ashley smiled, and for the first time, Grace saw herself reflected in her granddaughter's expression. The same calculating intelligence, the same ability to find advantage in apparently hopeless situations. "Because while you've been busy monologuing, I've been watching the parking lot through that window," Ashley said, nodding toward the rain-streaked glass. "And unless I'm mistaken, those headlights pulling in belong to the state police." Everyone turned to look, and sure enough, the distinctive light bar of a patrol car was visible through the storm. The leader's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "Coincidence," he said, but Grace could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Maybe," Ashley agreed. "Or maybe the trucker over there hit a panic button app on his phone before you made him put it down." Or maybe the night manager called it in when he saw 3 men walk into his diner and start making threats. Grace felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly knocked her over. Ashley was thinking like a foreman, always 3 steps ahead, always looking for leverage in any situation. The leader was now clearly agitated, his careful plans beginning to unravel. "We're leaving. Now. Both of you." "I don't think so," came a new voice from the kitchen doorway. A man in his 60s emerged, wearing a grease-stained apron and carrying a baseball bat with the casual confidence of someone who'd used it before. His name tag read Mel, and he had the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent dealing with difficult customers. "This is my place," Mel said calmly, "and I don't take kindly to folks who threaten my employees." The situation was rapidly spinning out of control. 3 armed criminals, 2 police cars in the parking lot, an elderly diner owner with a baseball bat, and Grace trying to figure out how to protect her granddaughter while managing a crisis that threatened to explode into violence. "Put the bat down, old man," the leader snarled, his hand moving toward his jacket. "I don't think so," Mel replied. "See, Ashley here is like family to me. Been working here 2 years, never missed a shift, never caused trouble. And this lady," he nodded toward Grace, "whoever she is, she's been nothing but polite since she walked in." Grace could see the leader calculating odds, weighing options. The police were outside but hadn't entered yet. Mel was armed but outnumbered. Ashley and Grace were trapped in the middle of what was about to become a very dangerous situation. "Ashley," Grace said quietly, "when I say run, you go through that kitchen door and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Ashley replied, her voice firm with the same stubborn determination that had characterized every Foreman woman for generations. "You will if I tell you to," Grace said, slipping into the authoritative tone she'd used to command boardrooms. "I've already lost 30 years with you. I won't lose the rest." The front door chimed again, and this time it was a state trooper, his hand resting casually on his service weapon as he surveyed the scene. "Evening, folks," the officer said. "Everything all right in here?" The leader's jaw tightened, his plans now completely derailed. Grace could see him weighing his options: surrender, fight, or try to bluff his way out of the situation. "Just fine, officer," he said, forcing a smile. "Just some travelers waiting out the storm." The trooper's eyes moved around the room, taking in the tension, the positioning, the barely concealed weapons. Grace had seen that look before in boardrooms, the moment when an experienced negotiator realized they were walking into a complex situation that required careful handling. "That's so," the trooper said. "Mind if I ask what brings you folks out on a night like this?" Grace felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Everything depended on the next few seconds, on how this played out, on whether she and Ashley would walk out of this diner alive or become casualties of Grace's past mistakes. But as she looked at her granddaughter, at Ashley's determined expression, at the way she stood ready to fight despite being terrified, at the courage that shone in eyes that looked so much like Elena's, Grace realized something profound. For the first time in 30 years, she wasn't alone in a crisis. She had family standing beside her, ready to face whatever came next. And that changed everything. What would you do if you discovered a family member you thought was dead, only to find yourself in immediate danger because of that connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The state trooper was moving deeper into the diner, his trained eyes cataloging details, when his radio crackled to life. The transmission was garbled through the static, but Grace caught enough words to make her blood freeze. "Federal jurisdiction. Stand down. Agents en route." The leader's smile returned, confident and predatory. "Looks like our ride is here, ladies." Grace's mind raced. Federal agents? This wasn't about the Myanmar factory at all. This was something bigger, more complex, and infinitely more dangerous than she'd realized. "What federal agents?" the state trooper demanded, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. "The kind that don't answer to local law enforcement," the leader replied. He pulled out his phone and showed the officer something on the screen. Credentials, authorization, Grace couldn't see what. But whatever it was made the trooper's expression change from suspicion to confusion to reluctant compliance. "This is highly irregular," the officer said. "I need to verify." "Officer Johnson," came a crisp voice from the doorway. A woman in a dark suit entered, her FBI badge visible on her belt. She was followed by two men in similar attire, all carrying themselves with a kind of authority that brooked no argument. "Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI. We'll take it from here." Grace felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was an arrest. "Grace Foreman," Agent Martinez said, approaching with measured steps. "You're under federal investigation for money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit international financial crimes. We need you to come with us for questioning." Ashley stepped forward, her face flushed with confusion and growing anger. "Wait. Just wait a minute. 5 minutes ago, these men were threatening to kidnap us, and now you're telling me they're federal agents? What kind of operation is this?" Grace stared at the leader, the man who'd threatened them, who'd spoken of revenge and leverage, as understanding crashed over her like a tsunami. "You're not criminals at all, are you?" "Special Agent David Chen," he said, producing his own credentials. "FBI Financial Crimes Division. We've been investigating the Foreman Group's offshore accounts for 18 months. The name hit Grace like a physical blow. Chen. Elena's married name. Ashley's last name. "Chen," Grace whispered, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "You're related to Ashley." Agent Chen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Ashley Chen is my daughter." The silence that followed was so complete that Grace could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Ashley's face cycled through emotions too complex to name. Shock, betrayal, disbelief, rage. "What?" Ashley's voice cracked on the single word. "What did you just say?" "Your father," Grace said, understanding flooding through her with devastating clarity. "The man Elena said left. He didn't leave, did he? You've been watching Ashley her whole life." Agent Chen's professional mask slipped slightly. "Elena made it clear that I wasn't welcome in Ashley's life. Said she wanted to protect her from complications." "Complications." Ashley's voice rose to nearly a shout. "You let me think you abandoned us. You let Mama struggle, work 2 jobs, go without health insurance while she was dying of cancer, and you call that protecting me from complications." Grace watched her granddaughter's world crumble in real time, understanding with painful clarity what Ashley was experiencing. The same betrayal, the same sense of having been lied to by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. "The investigation into your grandmother's finances began long before we realized the connection," Agent Chen said, his voice carefully controlled. "When we discovered that Ashley was Grace Foreman's granddaughter, I should have recused myself. But you saw an opportunity," Grace finished, her own voice heavy with disgust. "Use your daughter as bait to get to me. Pretend to be criminals so I'd reveal myself, then swoop in with the cavalry to make it look legitimate." Agent Martinez stepped forward. "Mrs. Foreman, Agent Chen's personal relationship with the witness wasn't disclosed to the Bureau until tonight. The investigation into your financial dealings is entirely separate from witness." Ashley's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm a witness now? To what?" Grace felt 30 years of carefully constructed defenses crumble as she watched Ashley, her granddaughter, Elena's daughter, realize that she'd been used as a pawn by everyone in her life. By Elena, who'd lied about Grace being dead. By Grace herself, who'd abandoned them both. And now by her own father, who'd let her believe he'd never cared enough to stay. "The Myanmar factory," Grace said slowly, understanding the full scope of the deception. "That was real, wasn't it? The investigation, the displaced workers, the financial irregularities." Agent Martinez nodded. "Your company's handling of the factory closure resulted in several $1 million in severance payments that mysteriously disappeared from workers' compensation funds. Those payments were traced to offshore accounts linked to the Foreman Group." I didn't steal from those workers, Grace said firmly. When the factory closed, I personally ensured every employee received full severance and retraining opportunities. Yet the money never reached them, Agent Chen said. And the paper trail leads directly to accounts you control. Grace's mind raced through possibilities. She delegated the Myanmar closure to her CFO, trusted him to handle the humanitarian aspects while she focused on the larger economic implications. But if the money had been diverted, someone embezzled those funds, she said. Used my accounts, my authorization codes. I need to see the financial records, the transfer orders. You'll have plenty of time to review evidence, Agent Martinez said. But right now, we need you to come with us for formal questioning. Ashley stood in the middle of the diner, surrounded by the wreckage of everything she'd thought she knew about her life, her family, her identity. Grace could see her struggling to process the magnitude of the deception. Not just Grace's abandonment, not just Elena's lies, but her father's calculated manipulation. All of this, Ashley said, her voice hollow. Every word, every moment since you walked in here tonight, it was all lies? Grace felt her heart breaking for the second time in 30 years. Not all of it, she said quietly. The regret is real. The love I felt for your mother, the love I feel for you, that's real. Love. Ashley laughed, but there was no humor in it. You call abandoning your pregnant daughter love? You call letting your granddaughter grow up in poverty while you built a billion-dollar empire love? The words hit Grace like physical blows, each one deserved, each one carrying the weight of 3 decades of consequences. And you, Ashley turned to Agent Chen, her father. You call watching from the shadows while your daughter struggles love? You call using me as bait in your investigation love? Agent Chen's professional composure finally cracked. I wanted to help. So many times, I wanted to reach out, to provide for you both. But Elena made me promise. Elena's dead, Ashley shouted. She's been dead for 5 years. What's your excuse for the last 5 years? The diner had become a courtroom, with Ashley as both judge and jury, passing verdict on the adults who'd shaped her life through their absence, their lies, their well-intentioned betrayals. Grace looked at her granddaughter, really looked at her, and saw not just Elena's features or her own stubborn determination, but something entirely new. Strength forged in abandonment. Integrity built on honesty because she'd been surrounded by lies. Compassion that had survived despite being betrayed by everyone who should have protected her. You're right, Grace said simply. All of us failed you. Your mother, your father, me. We all chose our own fears, our own pride, our own sense of what was right over what you needed. And I'm sorry. Sorrier than you'll ever know. Agent Chen stepped forward. Ashley, I know this is overwhelming. Don't, Ashley said, holding up her hand. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I don't want to hear about investigations or protection or complicated circumstances. I want to know why every adult in my life thought lying to me was better than trusting me with the truth. Grace felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than blood or DNA. Ashley wasn't just Elena's daughter or her granddaughter. She was herself, a woman who'd been shaped by abandonment but not broken by it, who'd been lied to but refused to become a liar, who'd been used but somehow retained her compassion. You're absolutely right, Grace said. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time I have left trying to earn the right to be called your grandmother. Agent Martinez cleared her throat. Mrs. Foreman, we really do need to continue this conversation at the field office. Grace nodded, understanding that her old life, the life of calculated risks and emotional distance, was over. Whether she went to prison or proved her innocence, whether she lost her fortune or kept it, nothing would ever be the same. But for the first time in 30 years, she had something more valuable than money or power or control. She had a granddaughter who was brave enough to demand the truth, even when the truth was devastating. And that was worth everything she'd built, everything she might lose. Ashley, she said, I know you have no reason to trust me, but whatever happens next, whatever the investigation reveals, I want you to know something. You are the best thing that ever came from the Foreman family. Your mother raised an extraordinary woman, and I'm proud to be your grandmother, even if I never earned the right to be." Ashley stared at her for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then, to everyone's surprise, she stepped forward and pulled Grace into a fierce embrace. "Don't you dare go to prison before I get some answers," she whispered against Grace's shoulder. Grace held her granddaughter tight, feeling 30 years of ice around her heart finally begin to melt. Whatever came next, whatever the cost, she would find a way to deserve this moment, this chance, this unexpected gift of family. The FBI field office in downtown Charlotte was a monument to bureaucratic efficiency, all fluorescent lights and gray carpeting that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who entered. Grace sat in interview room C, her hands folded on the metal table, watching Agent Martinez arrange files with methodical precision. It had been 6 hours since they'd left Mel's diner. 6 hours since her world had been turned upside down, inside out, and shaken until everything she thought she knew had fallen out like coins from torn pockets. Ashley was somewhere else in the building, giving her own statement. They'd been separated immediately upon arrival. Standard procedure, Agent Martinez had explained, though Grace suspected it was also strategic. Keep the family members apart, prevent them from coordinating their stories. Let isolation do what interrogation sometimes couldn't. "Let's go through this one more time," Agent Martinez said, opening a thick folder. The Myanmar Textile Factory, owned by Foreman International subsidiary Pacific Rim Manufacturing, closed in September 2009 during the global financial crisis. Grace nodded. She'd told this story 3 times already, but she understood the process. Repetition revealed inconsistencies, and inconsistencies revealed lies. The problem was, Grace was telling the truth, and the truth wasn't setting her free. "You authorized severance payments totaling $4.7 million to be distributed among the 2,300 displaced workers," Agent Martinez continued. "An average of just over $2,000 per worker, generous by regional standards." "More than generous," Grace corrected. "The legal requirement was 60 days' wages. I authorized 6 months, plus retraining opportunities and job placement assistance." Yet according to testimony from 17 former workers, interviews conducted by our Bangkok field office, none of them received more than $200. Some received nothing at all. Grace felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her stomach. Then someone stole that money. Someone with access to my authorization codes, my accounts, my digital signature. Agent Martinez slid a document across the table. "This is a transfer order, dated September 15, 2009. Your signature, your account, redirecting the Myanmar Severance Fund to a shell company in the Cayman Islands." Grace stared at the document, her own signature staring back at her in black ink. It looked authentic, the slight flourish on the G, the way she dotted her I's, even the characteristic hesitation before the F in Foreman that came from years of signing legal documents. But she'd never seen this document before in her life. "I didn't sign this," she said quietly. "Mrs. Foreman, we have handwriting analysis. We have digital forensics confirming the signature came from your secured tablet. We have bank records showing the transfers originated from your personal access codes. Then someone forged my signature and hacked my accounts." Grace's voice was steady, but inside she felt panic beginning to claw at her composure. The evidence was overwhelming, professional, damning, and completely fabricated. Agent Martinez leaned back in her chair. "Who had access to your personal accounts in 2009? Grace considered the question. "My CFO at the time, Robert Thornton. My personal assistant, Margaret Walsh. My head of security, James Morrison. And—" She paused, a sick realization beginning to form. "My daughter Elena." "Your daughter had access to your financial accounts?" "Limited access. Emergency authorization only, in case something happened to me." Grace's throat felt dry. She never used it. At least, I never thought she used it. Agent Martinez made a note. According to our records, Elena Foreman accessed your accounts 17 times between 2009 and 2011. Small amounts, mostly. Under the reporting threshold. The words hit Grace like physical blows. Elena had been stealing from her. Not millions, that would have been noticed. But small amounts, consistent amounts, enough to make the difference between poverty and stability for a young mother raising a mixed-race child alone. How much? Grace whispered. Total? Approximately $340,000 over 2 years. Grace closed her eyes, seeing Elena's face the night she'd left. Young, defiant, desperate. She'd offered Elena money that night, offered to support her and the baby if she'd just give up this foolish notion of raising a child alone. Elena had thrown the offer back in her face, said she'd rather struggle than accept help from someone who was ashamed of her own granddaughter. But she had taken money. Just not directly. Not in a way that would have required swallowing her pride or acknowledging Grace's authority. The larger theft, Grace said, opening her eyes. The Myanmar money. Elena couldn't have done that alone. She didn't have the technical knowledge, the access, the contacts to set up shell companies. No, Agent Martinez agreed. But she could have provided the access codes to someone who did. The door to the interview room opened, and Agent Chen entered. He looked haggard, older than his years, and Grace could see Ashley's stubbornness in the set of his jaw. David, Agent Martinez said, I thought you were recused from this case. Officially, I am. He sat down across from Grace, his eyes haunted. Unofficially, I need to tell you something about Elena. Grace felt her heart stop. What about Elena? Agent Chen pulled out his own folder, thinner than Martinez's but somehow more ominous. Elena came to me in 2009. Said she had information about financial irregularities at Foreman International. Said she could provide access to accounts, documents, evidence of money laundering and tax evasion. The room tilted around Grace. Elena was working with the FBI? She was working with me, Chen corrected. This was before we had Ashley, before we'd even met officially. Elena was angry, desperate, convinced that her mother was using the family business to hide illegal activities. She wanted revenge. So you used her, Grace said, understanding flooding through her with horrible clarity. You used my daughter to build a case against me. I was young, ambitious. I thought I was doing the right thing. Agent Chen's voice was thick with regret. Elena provided access codes, signatures, authorization protocols. We were building a case, gathering evidence. But then you fell in love with her, Grace continued, the pieces clicking into place. And she got pregnant. And everything changed. Chen nodded. Elena realized what we were doing could destroy you, could destroy Ashley's inheritance, her future. She tried to stop it, tried to cover her tracks. Agent Martinez was taking notes furiously. Agent Chen, this information should have been disclosed years ago. Elena made me promise never to tell anyone. Said if the truth came out, it would destroy Ashley's relationship with both of us. Chen looked directly at Grace. She died believing that you were innocent, that someone else had used the access she'd provided to actually steal the money. Grace felt the world crumble around her. Elena had been trying to protect her in the end, had died believing in Grace's innocence, carrying the guilt of having provided the tools for someone else's crime. Who else knew about Elena's cooperation? Grace asked. Agent Chen hesitated. Robert Thornton. Robert Thornton. Grace's CFO. The man she'd trusted with her company's financial operations for over a decade. The man who'd had unlimited access to her accounts, her authorization codes, her complete trust. Robert knew that Elena was feeding information to the FBI, and he used that access to steal the Myanmar money, Grace said, the betrayal cutting deeper than any financial loss. He's been hiding behind Elena's cooperation for 15 years. We need to bring Thornton in for questioning, Agent Martinez said. Good luck with that, Agent Chen replied grimly. Robert Thornton died in a car accident 3 months ago. Convenient timing, considering we were reopening the Myanmar investigation. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace sat in the sterile interview room, surrounded by evidence of crime she hadn't committed, betrayal she hadn't suspected, and the devastating realization that her daughter had died believing she was protecting Grace from consequences Elena herself had set in motion. Where does this leave us? Grace asked finally. With a dead suspect and a case built on circumstantial evidence, Agent Martinez admitted. Unless we can find concrete proof that Thornton was the one who actually moved the money. You'll have to charge me based on the evidence you have, Grace finished. Elena's access codes, my signatures, my accounts. Agent Chen leaned forward. There might be another way. If we could find where Thornton hid the money, if we could trace the actual transfers. That could take years, Grace said. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you're looking at federal charges for financial crimes that could put you in prison for the rest of your life, Agent Martinez said bluntly. Grace thought about Ashley, somewhere else in this building, giving statements about a family she'd just discovered and might lose again before she even had a chance to know them. She thought about Elena, who died carrying secrets that could have exonerated them both. She thought about Robert Thornton, who'd played them all like pieces on a chessboard and taken his secrets to the grave. For the first time in her 71 years, Grace Foreman felt truly helpless. I want to see my granddaughter, she said quietly. Agent Martinez shook her head. That's not possible right now. She's still giving her statement, and I want to see my granddaughter, Grace repeated, her voice carrying the authority that had once moved mountains and toppled governments. Before you arrest me, before you destroy what's left of my family, I want 5 minutes with the only good thing to come out of this entire mess. Agent Chen stood up. I'll arrange it. David, Agent Martinez began. She's my daughter too, he said quietly. And if Grace Foreman is going to prison, Ashley deserves to say goodbye. As they left the interview room, Grace wondered if 5 minutes would be enough to undo 30 years of damage, to give Ashley the family she'd always deserved, to somehow make right all the things that had gone so terribly wrong. She was about to find out that 5 minutes could change everything, or destroy it completely. Ashley sat in conference room B, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues, her eyes red from crying and her voice hoarse from 6 hours of questions. The sterile room felt like a cage, all beige walls and fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and unreal. Agent Williams, the Bureau's victim advocate, sat across from her with infinite patience and a stack of legal documents that seemed to grow every time Ashley looked away. I know this is overwhelming, Agent Williams said gently. Learning about your family, your father's involvement in the investigation, your grandmother's legal troubles, it's a lot to process. Ashley laughed bitterly. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it. 24 hours ago, I thought I was an orphan working in a diner. Now I find out I'm the granddaughter of a billionaire who might be a criminal, and my father is an FBI agent who's been watching me my whole life. Oh, and my dead mother was apparently some kind of federal informant. So yeah, overwhelming is one word for it. The door opened, and Agent Chen entered. Ashley's father. The words still felt foreign in her mind, impossible to reconcile with the man who'd abandoned her and Elena 28 years ago. Ashley, he said quietly, I know you don't want to see me. You're right. I don't. Ashley's voice was flat, emotionally exhausted. But apparently, what I want hasn't mattered to anyone in my family for the past 3 decades, so why start now? Agent Chen winced but pressed on. Grace wants to see you. Before she's formally charged. Ashley felt her heart clench. Despite everything, the lies, the betrayals, the impossible circumstances, something had happened in that diner. A connection had sparked between her and Grace, fragile but real. The thought of losing her grandmother just hours after finding her felt like losing Elena all over again. How long do I have? She asked. A few minutes. Maybe less. Ashley stood up, her legs shaky from exhaustion and stress. Then let's not waste time. Grace was waiting in a small conference room down the hall, looking smaller than she had in the diner, more vulnerable. The expensive suit was wrinkled now, her perfect hair mussed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But when she saw Ashley, her face lit up with the kind of fierce love that Ashley had only ever seen in Elena's eyes. "Ashley," Grace breathed, rising from her chair. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't." Ashley remained by the door, maintaining distance even as every instinct told her to run to this woman who shared her blood, her stubborn chin, her fierce determination. "They're saying you might go to prison." "They're probably right." Grace's voice was steady, accepting. "The evidence is substantial. But you didn't do it. It wasn't a question." Somehow, despite everything, Ashley was certain of Grace's innocence. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was wishful thinking, but she believed in her grandmother's integrity with a certainty that surprised her. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "How can you be so sure?" "Because Elena believed in you." Ashley stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than caution. "Agent Chen, my father, he said she died thinking you were innocent. And Mama was the best judge of character I ever knew. If she believed in you, even after everything that happened between you, then you didn't steal that money." Grace reached out tentatively, and Ashley let her take her hands. Her grandmother's fingers were cold, trembling, but her grip was strong. "I failed your mother," Grace whispered. "I failed you. I let pride and fear and prejudice destroy the most important relationships in my life. And now, when I finally have a chance to make things right." "Now you're going to fight," Ashley said firmly. "We're going to fight. Together." Grace stared at her granddaughter in amazement. "Ashley, you don't understand. If I'm convicted, if my assets are frozen, there's nothing I can give you. No inheritance, no financial security, no." "Do you think I care about your money?" Ashley's voice rose with indignation. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 12 years old. I don't need your fortune, Grace. I need my grandmother." The simple declaration hung between them, more powerful than any legal document or financial statement. Grace felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than blood or obligation. Ashley wasn't looking for rescue or redemption or reparations. She was offering something Grace had never expected to receive: unconditional love. "What do we do?" Grace asked, and for the first time in decades, she was asking for help instead of commanding a solution. Ashley's mind was racing, connecting pieces, following threads. "The real thief is dead, right? This Robert Thornton." Grace nodded. "Died 3 months ago in a car accident." "Convenient." Ashley's expression sharpened with the same calculating intelligence Grace recognized from her own business dealings. "What about his estate? His personal effects? If he was hiding stolen money for 15 years, there has to be a trail somewhere. The FBI would have investigated." "The FBI was investigating you, not him. They thought they had their culprit." Ashley began pacing, her mind working through possibilities. But if Thornton was smart enough to frame you, he was probably smart enough to keep evidence as insurance. Documentation, account numbers, communications, something to protect himself if the investigation got too close. Grace felt a spark of hope for the first time in hours. His widow might have kept his papers, his computer files. Or his lawyer might have instructions about sealed documents that were only supposed to be opened under certain circumstances. Ashley's excitement was building. "Grace, you hired Thornton, you trusted him, you probably know more about his habits and personality than the FBI does. Where would he hide something that important?" Grace closed her eyes, thinking back over 15 years of working with Robert Thornton. He'd been meticulous, paranoid about digital security, old-fashioned in many ways. He'd always insisted on paper backups for important documents, had a safe deposit box for his most sensitive materials. "The lake house," Grace said suddenly. He had a cabin on Lake Norman, inherited from his father. He used to joke that it was his off-the-grid retreat. No internet, no phone service, just a place to disappear when the corporate world got too stressful. Ashley's eyes lit up. If he was hiding evidence, that's where it would be. But the FBI has no reason to search there. As far as they're concerned, Thornton was just another executive. They wouldn't have included his personal property in their investigation. "Then we need to tell them." "Tell them what?" "That we think the dead man might have hidden evidence at his cabin based on our speculation." Grace shook her head. "They need probable cause for a search warrant. They need concrete evidence that a crime was committed there." Ashley was quiet for a moment, and Grace could see her working through the legal complexities, the bureaucratic obstacles, the time constraints they were facing. "What if we found the evidence ourselves?" Ashley asked quietly. "Ashley, no. Breaking and entering is a federal crime. If you're caught, if I'm caught, I go to jail. If we do nothing, you go to jail." Ashley met her grandmother's eyes with unwavering determination. "I just found you, Grace. I'm not losing you without a fight." Grace felt her heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. Ashley was willing to risk everything. Her freedom, her future, her safety. For a grandmother she'd known for less than 12 hours. The love and loyalty Elena had raised in her daughter was staggering. "There has to be another way," Grace said. "Someone with legal access to Thornton's property, someone who could search without breaking the law." "His widow," Ashley said suddenly. "If she's willing to help, if she believes Thornton might have been involved in illegal activities, she could give us permission to search the cabin." "Why would she help us?" "She probably thinks I'm guilty, just like everyone else." Ashley smiled, and Grace saw Elena's mischievous spirit in that expression. "Leave that to me. I have some experience dealing with difficult customers. And besides, what widow wouldn't want to know if her dead husband was a criminal?" The door opened, and Agent Martinez entered with 2 marshals behind her. "Mrs. Foreman, it's time." Grace felt panic rise in her throat. Time to be arrested, processed, booked into federal custody. Time for her brief reunion with Ashley to end before it had really begun. "Wait," Ashley said, stepping between Grace and the agents. "I have information about the Myanmar case. About Robert Thornton." Agent Martinez paused. "What kind of information?" "The kind that might prove my grandmother's innocence. But I need 24 hours to verify it." "Ms. Chen, I appreciate your loyalty to your grandmother, but we can't delay federal charges based on speculation." "Then don't delay them," Ashley interrupted. "Arrest her, process her, do whatever you have to do. But give me 24 hours to find proof that Robert Thornton was the real thief. If I can't produce evidence by tomorrow night, then proceed with the prosecution." Agent Martinez looked skeptical. "And if you can produce evidence?" "Then you drop the charges and go after the real criminals. Whoever Thornton was working with, wherever he hid the money, whatever network he was part of." Grace watched her granddaughter negotiate with federal agents like she was born to it, displaying the same fearless determination that had built the Foreman empire. In that moment, she realized that Ashley didn't need protecting. She needed supporting. 24 hours, Grace said, adding her voice to Ashley's request. "That's all we're asking for." Agent Martinez considered, then nodded slowly. 24 hours. "But Mrs. Foreman, you'll be in federal custody during that time. And Ms. Chen, if you interfere with this investigation in any way, you'll be charged as an accessory." As they led Grace away in handcuffs, she looked back at Ashley one last time. Her granddaughter stood in the doorway, shoulders straight, chin raised, eyes blazing with determination. "I'll find it," Ashley called out. "Whatever Thornton hid, wherever he hid it, I'll find it." Grace believed her. For the first time in 30 years, She had someone fighting for her instead of against her. Someone who saw her not as a billionaire or a criminal or a source of shame, but simply as family. It was the most powerful feeling in the world. 22 hours later, Ashley stood on the porch of a modest ranch house in Cornelius, North Carolina, her heart hammering against her ribs. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and lake water, peaceful and serene, the antithesis of the storm raging inside her chest. Margaret Thornton answered the door after the third knock, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes red-rimmed with the kind of grief that had settled into permanent residence. She was younger than Ashley had expected, maybe mid-60s, with the careful composure of someone who'd spent 3 months learning to navigate widowhood. "Mrs. Thornton? My name is Ashley Chen. I called earlier about your husband's work with Foreman International." Margaret's expression tightened. "I told you on the phone, I don't know anything about Robert's business dealings. And I certainly don't want to discuss Grace Foreman's legal troubles. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult. But I have reason to believe your husband might have been involved in the financial crimes that Grace Foreman is being charged with. If I'm right, then an innocent woman is going to prison." Margaret Thornton studied Ashley's face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or signs of deception. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she stepped back and gestured Ashley inside. The house was exactly what Ashley had expected. Comfortable but not lavish, filled with the accumulated memories of a 40-year marriage. Family photos lined the mantelpiece. Vacation souvenirs crowded the bookshelf, and everything smelled faintly of Robert Thornton's pipe tobacco. "Coffee?" Margaret asked, falling back on the rituals of hospitality. "Please." Ashley followed her into the kitchen, noting the bills stacked neatly on the counter, the modest appliances, the general air of middle-class respectability. If Robert Thornton had stolen millions, he hadn't spent it on himself. "You said on the phone that you think Robert was involved in stealing money from factory workers," Margaret said as she prepared the coffee with mechanical precision. "That's impossible. Robert was the most honest man I ever knew." Ashley accepted the mug gratefully, using the warmth to steady her hands. "Mrs. Thornton, what do you know about the Myanmar textile factory closure?" "Very little. Robert handled international operations for Foreman International. He said the factory closure was difficult but necessary. Economic conditions, you understand." Margaret sat across from Ashley at the small kitchen table. He was quite upset about the displaced workers. Said Grace Foreman had authorized generous severance packages. The workers never received those packages. The money was stolen, diverted to offshore accounts through forged authorization codes. Margaret's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "That's impossible. Robert would never." "Mrs. Thornton, I believe someone was forcing your husband to cooperate. Someone with leverage over him, someone who could threaten what he cared about most." Ashley leaned forward, gentle but persistent. "Was Robert in any kind of trouble 15 years ago? Financial problems, health issues, anything that might have made him vulnerable to coercion?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Robert had a gambling problem." Ashley felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of gambling?" "Sports betting, mainly. It started small, just weekend games, friendly wagers with colleagues. But after his father died and left him the lake house, he started going there every weekend. Said he needed time to think, to process his grief." Margaret's voice grew bitter. What he was really doing was betting online. Poker, sports, anything he could find. By 2009, he owed nearly $200,000 to some very dangerous people. The pieces clicked into place in Ashley's mind. Robert Thornton, desperate and in debt to criminals who wouldn't accept bankruptcy as an excuse. Someone approaches him with an offer, help steal money from the Myanmar workers, and his debts disappear. All he has to do is use his access to Grace's accounts and authorization codes. "Mrs. Thornton, did Robert ever mention anyone specific?" anyone who might have helped him with his gambling debts. There was a man who came to the house once. Robert was terrified of him. I'd never seen my husband scared before, but this man. Margaret shuddered. He had cold eyes, spoke with some kind of accent. Russian, maybe, or Eastern European. Robert called him Victor. Ashley's heart raced. Victor, a name, finally something concrete to give the FBI. Did you ever see this Victor again? No, but Robert started going to the lake house more often after that meeting. Sometimes for days at a time. He said he was working on a special project for Grace Foreman, something that required complete privacy. Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me. Would you be willing to let me search the lake house? If Robert was being coerced into stealing that money, there might be evidence there. Something that could prove Grace Foreman's innocence and expose the real criminals. Margaret stared at her for a long moment. You really believe Grace is innocent? I know she is. And I think Robert was as much a victim as those factory workers. But the only way to prove it is to find whatever he might have hidden at the lake house. Margaret rose from the table and disappeared into another room. When she returned, she was carrying a set of keys and a manila envelope. Robert made me promise to give this to the police if anything ever happened to him, she said, handing both items to Ashley. I was going to honor that promise, but after his accident, I couldn't bear to read it. I couldn't bear to learn that the man I loved for 40 years might have been a criminal. Ashley opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Robert Thornton's careful handwriting. If you're reading this, then I'm dead and Grace Foreman is probably being charged with crimes I helped commit. I was forced to steal money from the Myanmar workers by a man named Viktor Kozlov, who threatened to kill Margaret if I didn't cooperate. I kept records of everything, account numbers, transfer orders, communications with Kozlov, hidden in the safe behind the painting in the lake house. Grace Foreman is innocent. I'm sorry for what I've done. Ashley felt tears of relief sting her eyes. This was it, the confession that would exonerate Grace and reveal the real criminals behind the theft. Mrs. Thornton, this letter proves that Grace didn't steal that money. Your husband was forced to help criminals who were threatening your life. Margaret sank into her chair, the weight of 15 years of unknowing complicity settling over her like a shroud. He was protecting me. All those years, he was protecting me. And now we're going to protect his memory by making sure the truth comes out. Ashley stood, clutching the keys and the confession. Where is the lake house? An hour later, Ashley stood in Robert Thornton's study, staring at a painting of Lake Norman that hung behind his desk. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. Time's almost up. Whatever you're going to find it fast. Ashley carefully lifted the painting from the wall, revealing a small wall safe with a digital lock. She tried Robert's birthday, Margaret's birthday, their anniversary. Nothing. Then she remembered something Margaret had mentioned about the lake house being inherited from Robert's father. She tried the date Robert's father had died. March 15, 1987. The safe clicked open. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, transfer orders, email printouts, and financial records going back 15 years. But most importantly, there was a digital recorder with a note attached. Conversations with VK Insurance. Ashley's hands shook as she pressed play. Robert Thornton's voice filled the study, younger sounding, terrified. Victor, I can't do this anymore. Grace is getting suspicious about the account discrepancies. Another voice, heavily accented, coldly amused. Mr. Thornton, you seem to forget our arrangement. You help us move money through your boss's accounts, and your wife lives to see another Christmas. Simple, yes. The Myanmar Severance Fund, that's $4.7 million. If I redirect that money, the FBI will investigate. They'll trace it back. Let them investigate Grace Foreman. She will make excellent scapegoat. Rich American businesswoman stealing from poor workers. Very believable story. Ashley fast-forwarded through 15 recordings, each one documenting Kozlov's threats, Thornton's reluctance, and the systematic theft of money that was supposed to help displaced workers rebuild their lives. The final recording was dated just 3 months before Thornton's death. "Victor, I'm retiring. I won't help you anymore. Robert, my friend, you misunderstand. You help us until you die. No retirement from our arrangement." Then maybe I should tell the FBI everything. Give them these recordings, expose your entire operation. You do that, and Margaret dies slowly. But perhaps we can reach new understanding. You keep quiet, and we find new ways to use Foreman accounts. Less risk for you, same profit for us. No. I'm done. I've kept records of everything. Insurance, you might say. If anything happens to me or Margaret, those records go straight to the FBI. The recording ended there. Ashley stared at the digital device, understanding with horrible clarity what had happened. Robert Thornton had tried to break free from Victor Kozlov's operation, had threatened to expose everything. 3 weeks later, he died in a single car accident on a rainy night. Her phone rang. "Agent Chen. Ashley, where are you? Grace's arraignment is in 2 hours. If you don't have something concrete." "I have everything," Ashley interrupted, clutching the recorder and the confession letter. "I have Robert Thornton's confession, recorded conversations with the real criminals, bank records showing the money trail, everything we need to prove Grace's innocence." "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "And Agent Chen?" "You need to put Margaret Thornton in protective custody immediately. Victor Kozlov and his people are still out there, and if they find out what we've discovered..." Ashley looked around the lakehouse study, at the evidence of 15 years of coercion and theft, at the proof that would free her grandmother and expose an international money laundering operation. "I'm bringing everything to the field office now," she said. "And Agent Chen? Call Grace's lawyer. Tell him the charges are about to be dropped." As Ashley carefully packed the evidence into her bag, she thought about Robert Thornton, a good man who'd made terrible choices to protect the woman he loved, who'd lived with guilt and fear for 15 years, who'd died trying to make things right. She thought about Elena, who'd tried to expose Grace's supposed crimes, but had ended up helping the real criminals frame her mother. She thought about Grace, sitting in a federal holding cell, facing life in prison for crimes she hadn't committed. And she thought about family, how love could be twisted into betrayal, how good intentions could lead to devastating consequences, how sometimes the truth was buried so deep it took a miracle to unearth it. Today, Ashley Chen had been that miracle. 6 weeks later, Grace Foreman sat in the kitchen of Ashley's modest apartment above the dry cleaners, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs and watching her granddaughter prepare dinner with the same methodical precision Elena had once shown in the Foreman mansion's gourmet kitchen. The apartment was small, a studio with a kitchenette, a fold-out bed, and barely enough room for 2 people to move around comfortably. But it was Ashley's space, earned through her own hard work, and Grace had never felt more at home anywhere in her life. "You know," Ashley said, stirring something that smelled like heaven in a battered saucepan, "you could buy this entire building and tear it down to build something more suited to your status." Grace laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in the weeks since her release from federal custody. "Are you trying to get rid of me already?" "Never." Ashley's voice was firm, final. "But I also won't let you pretend to be something you're not just to make me comfortable. You're Grace Foreman. You own companies, employ thousands of people, have your name on hospital wings. You don't have to slum it in my studio apartment to prove you love me. And you don't have to keep working double shifts at Mel's Diner to prove you're independent," Grace countered gently. "The trust fund I established isn't charity, Ashley. It's your birthright, money that should have been Elena's, that should have supported you both all these years." They'd been having variations of this conversation for weeks. Ashley, stubborn as any Foreman woman, insisted on maintaining her own life, her own job, her own sense of self-sufficiency. Grace, equally stubborn, wanted to shower her granddaughter with all the advantages she'd been denied for 28 years. "Compromise," Ashley said, the same word that had become their family motto. I'll accept the trust fund if you accept that I want to earn my own way. And I'll let you buy me a proper apartment if you promise to stop trying to hire me as CEO of your foundation. Grace smiled. Counter-offer. You let me buy you a proper apartment, and I'll consider your application for the foundation's community outreach director position. It's a real job, with real responsibilities, and a salary you'll actually have to earn. Ashley turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand, and Grace saw Elena's mischievous smile. Deal. But I'm interviewing other candidates too. No nepotism in the Foreman empire. Wouldn't dream of it. The doorbell rang, and Ashley moved to answer it. Agent Chen, David, stood in the hallway, looking awkward and uncertain. The relationship between father and daughter was still fragile, built on weekly dinners and careful conversations about everything except the 28 years of absence between them. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Only our daily argument about money and independence," Ashley replied, stepping back to let him in. "Come on in. There's enough pasta for 3. David Chen had aged a decade in the 6 weeks since the investigation concluded. The exposure of Viktor Kozlov's money laundering operation had led to arrests across 3 countries, the recovery of nearly $30 million in stolen funds, and a complete restructuring of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But it had also forced him to confront the damage his choices had done to his own family. "Any word on the Kozlov extradition?" Grace asked as they gathered around Ashley's small table. "He'll fight it, but the evidence is overwhelming. Between Robert's recordings and the financial trail Ashley uncovered, we have him on money laundering, extortion, and conspiracy charges in multiple jurisdictions." David accepted a plate of pasta with grateful hands. "Margaret Thornton is doing well in protective custody. She's actually relieved to finally understand what Robert was going through all those years." Grace nodded. Margaret Thornton had become an unexpected ally, providing testimony that helped prosecutors build their case against Kozlov's organization. More than that, she'd become a friend, another woman who'd loved a good man trapped in impossible circumstances. "What about the Myanmar workers?" Ashley asked. "Have they received their compensation?" "The recovered funds are being distributed through a court-supervised program. Every worker who was supposed to receive severance will get their money, plus interest and additional compensation for the 15-year delay." Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It won't undo the hardship they endured, but it's something. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, 3 people learning to be a family despite decades of separation and misunderstanding. It wasn't easy. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and there were still moments of awkwardness, still conversations that ended in tears or raised voices. But they were trying, and that was more than Grace had dared hope for 6 weeks ago. "I have something for you," David said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, wrapped package and handed it to Ashley. "It's not much, but I thought you should have it." Ashley unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a silver baby rattle engraved with her birth date and the words, "Daddy's little girl." "I bought it the day you were born," David said quietly. "Elena let me visit once, in the hospital. You were so small, so perfect. I wanted to give this to you then, but she said it would be easier if I just disappeared." Ashley stared at the rattle, her eyes filling with tears. "You kept this for 28 years? I kept it in my desk drawer at work. Every case I closed, every criminal I caught, I'd look at it and remember that I had a daughter somewhere who deserved a world where justice mattered." Grace watched her granddaughter struggle with the gift, with the implications of her father's long-distance love, with the complexity of forgiving someone who'd caused so much pain while trying to do the right thing. "Thank you," Ashley finally whispered. It's perfect." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Ashley stood and moved to the kitchen window, where a small shelf held the few mementos she'd kept from Elena's life. She placed the rattle next to her mother's photo, creating a shrine to the family she'd never known she had. "I've been thinking," Ashley said, her back still turned to them, "about Elena, about the choices she made, about why she lied to both of us about each other. Grace felt her throat tighten. They'd all been thinking about Elena, about the young woman who'd tried to protect everyone and ended up hurting them all. She was scared, Ashley continued. Scared that if David stayed, he'd be pulled between his career and his family. Scared that if Grace acknowledged me, I'd grow up in the spotlight, targeted by people who wanted to hurt the Foreman empire. Scared that if she told me the truth about either of you, I'd try to find you and get hurt in the process. She turned back to face them, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was wrong. She was wrong about all of it. But she wasn't evil, and she wasn't selfish. She was just a scared young woman trying to protect everyone she loved, and she made the best decisions she could with the information she had. Grace stood and pulled Ashley into her arms, feeling 30 years of anger and resentment melt away. Elena had been 19 when she'd made those choices, barely older than a child herself, facing impossible circumstances with no good options. "You're right," Grace whispered. She was protecting us all, the only way she knew how. David joined their embrace, and for the first time in 3 decades, 3 generations of the Foreman family stood together, connected by love instead of divided by pride. When they finally separated, Ashley wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "So here's what I propose. We stop trying to rewrite the past and start focusing on the future. We acknowledge Elena's mistakes and forgive them. We acknowledge our own mistakes and learn from them. And we build something new together, not as strangers trying to make up for lost time, but as family choosing to love each other moving forward." Grace felt something settle in her chest, a peace she hadn't experienced since she was young enough to believe the world was fundamentally good. "What did you have in mind?" Ashley's smile widened, taking on the same determined expression Grace recognized from boardroom negotiations and hostile takeover meetings. "I want to start a foundation. The Elena Chen Memorial Foundation for Displaced Workers. We'll use the Foreman resources to help families affected by corporate restructuring, factory closures, economic displacement. We'll provide not just financial assistance, but job training, education, legal support, everything Elena would have wanted for people caught in impossible circumstances." Grace stared at her granddaughter in amazement. "Ashley, that's brilliant. And expensive. And complicated. And probably the most meaningful thing the Foreman fortune has ever been used for." "I know. That's why I'll need a very experienced businesswoman to help me navigate the corporate and legal complexities." Ashley's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Know anyone who might be interested in that kind of challenge?" Grace laughed until her sides hurt, until tears of joy replaced the tears of grief she'd been carrying for 30 years. "I might know someone, but she's very demanding, very stubborn, and she'll probably try to take over the entire operation within 6 months." "Perfect. She sounds exactly like the kind of person who could change the world." Outside Ashley's window, the sun was setting over Charlotte, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Grace looked at her granddaughter, Elena's daughter, David's child, her own family, and felt something she'd never experienced before: complete contentment. She was Grace Foreman, billionaire businesswoman, philanthropist, empire builder. But more importantly, she was Ashley's grandmother, Elena's mother, part of a family that had been broken and was now healing. She was home. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places, and the most valuable relationships are built on forgiveness rather than perfection. What do you think it means to truly come home? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story touched your heart.